I will go into my talk. I write for PW Insider Elite.com.
What don't you
It
do?
also is on PWInsider.com.
My
And
goodness.
on top of that, I also do a podcast about comic books where this week we are posting our 675th episode.
Listen.
So I know how to talk.
Hey, awesome. I mean, who else could we have a professional keynote when you just listed 19 professions? I mean, I love this. Let's see, the 3-act structure in wrestling, storytelling, and coverage. So yes,
Yes, I am putting the 3-act structure in the chat. So why should I know anything about anything? The first thing is, I did not set out to be a professional wrestling journalist. I have a lot of problems with what is called professional wrestling journalism, because the history of it is that it used to be dirt sheets, which was basically gossip columns on paper. And then in the 90s, they would put results and everything. Then it moved to the net. And the place I work for, PW Insider, has probably the best reporter in the business, Mike Johnson, who, just working with him, he knows everybody. And they, unlike a lot of wrestling journalists, they will double and triple source their stories before they print them. Why do I know that other people don't do that? Because I've met them. I've gone to press conferences, and on PW Insider every so often, I talk about how Mike tells me, dress nice, don't embarrass us. And the first time he did that, I was like, what are you talking about? And then I went. And there were people in wrestling shirts. There were people in wrestling cosplay that were also journalists. So wrestling journalism is, quite honestly, in my opinion, in its infancy. There aren't a lot of journalists who go into wrestling. It's mostly fans. But I was sort of dragged into it. I would send reports from Minneapolis, which is where I'm from, and I would send reports on the Ring of Honor shows. I would send reports on some of the Steel Domain shows that I was able to go to. And then we had Jerry Lynn's retirement show here, and I sent in a long report, and I had talked to some of the wrestlers before and after, and I wrote it up. And then in 2018, if you remember, that was the Royal Rumble. It was the first Royal Rumble that had both a men's and a women's Royal Rumble. The owner of the website, Dave Shearer, asked a day before, hey, can you help us cover this? So in other words, I was thrown into the deep end of the pool, having to type up what is going on in 2 different Royal Rumbles and the other matches my first time out. I have never been writing to the point where my Fitbit kept saying, you're doing great cardio workout, because you're writing, okay, this person's coming in. This is what's going on in the ring. You're recapping and trying to keep up. And having never done it before, I ran about 45 minutes behind after the first Rumble. I don't even know how late I was on the second Rumble. But I did a good enough job that they asked me to keep coming back, to fill in for people. And then when AEW started, I asked if I could be the main recap guy for AEW. And they said yes, and that's what I've been doing. I covered their first show, the Fight for the Fallen, I think was their first show. Up to tonight, I'll be covering Collision. And what I wanted to talk about is how both wrestling in the ring, in how they structure the shows, and when you're writing about wrestling, you follow the 3-act structure. So there is the 3-act structure, which is, and it seems, but I'm going to be honest with you, I took creative writing classes all through college and high school. Never once did they talk about the 3-act structure. They talked about, you need to do imagery and you need to have description. And no, you need story structure before you do any of that. So the basic parts of the 3 act structure are what I call, it says beginning. Basically, that's your baseline. Everything is normal. When you're watching a movie from the 90s, this is everybody's getting ready for breakfast, and the dad doesn't have time to eat, and he grabs, just drinks some orange juice and grabs some toast. Inciting incident is when he goes outside and a bomb goes off. So that is your inciting incident. That is what starts your story. As your story goes on, there are obstacles that need to be overcome. There are things that are revealed as the story goes on. When you get near the climax, first you have the disaster, or as is normally called, loss of all hope. There's no way we can win. The Death Star has got um, the rebel base in its sights. There is a ticking clock. The hero must make a decision of some kind. That is the climax of Act Two. That decision is what drives the rest of the story. So, what does that mean in wrestling? Usually, in an inciting incident for a wrestling feud, all feuds break down to one of 3 things: money, revenge, or titles. Now, money is something that has faded away over the years, but it used to be, if you watch wrestling from the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, he's fighting for the winner's share of the purse. The reason they're wrestling is the winner gets a larger amount than the loser. That was more in the kayfabe era. They've let that sort of slip away, although every so often. Last week, Tony Khan had a what, a 8-man tag, and the winners got $400,000. Did they get that money? No, they didn't get the money. As a matter of fact, I forget which wrestler it was, told a story about how he had not smartened his wife up to the business. He had not told her that it was storyline. And on TV, he won a $10,000 match. And when he came home, she was furious with him because he did not have the $10,000, and she was sure that he had spent it. Revenge. Most wrestling stories now are about revenge. If they're not about revenge, they're about winning a title. One of the things AEW has changed over the last year is everyone is gunning for the world title. There's more than just one person going for it. There are 3 or 4 people who are all jockeying for position on that. Now, inciting incidents are something that can be serious or silly. Usually, they don't spend a lot of time on an inciting incident. The silly ones that I remember the most are when Edge and Booker T were both up for a Japanese hair commercial. And when Booker T did not get the Japanese hair commercial, he attacked Edge, and that started their feud. Or the worst wrestling angle of all time, Triple H versus Kane. The inciting incident was that Triple H wanted to show that Kane was a terrible person by pointing out that he had killed his prom date, Katie Vick, in a drunk driving incident. If you want to know about that worst angle, just go to WrestleCrap. It's one of their featured stories. But that is your inciting incident. Why are these 2 people fighting? What is the grudge they have? Why does one want revenge on the other? This then leads to a different type of revenge, which I've called the slow burn build. And the best example of this is Virgil versus Ted DiBiase. Back in the 80s, Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, had a valet, Virgil, who he treated poorly. And now, when they do stories like this, it begins and stops usually within 2 to 3 months. Back in the WWE, back in the day, they didn't have as many stories, so they let them burn for a long time. And it took years for Virgil, with the help of Roddy Piper, to finally turn on Ted DiBiase. And because it had built for so long, when Virgil turned, he was a huge baby face. If you go back and watch their first match, That crowd is into it more than any other match on the card. The problem is, afterward, they didn't have any place for Virgil to go. They didn't have any revenge. So he slowly slid down the card with less and less interest because for your story, you've got to have a reason. These two people have to have a reason to hate each other. Sorry, I'm getting my notes here. So for the rising tension, this is the second act. You have your inciting incident. These two people hate each other. Now, some will last for a long time, some will last for a shorter amount of time, some will just be in a show. But for your rising tension in wrestling, it's promos. They tell dueling promos. Sometimes they're in the ring, sometimes they're back and forth. That is how they build the story. You build the tension. What Dusty Rhodes said, talking people into the building. Not only do these two people hate each other, but now they're going to talk about why they hate each other. They're going to go back and forth, either with insults or threats or something else to raise that tension. As the second act goes along, there will then be confrontations. Maybe it's a confrontation in the ring. Maybe it's a confrontation where somebody comes out to watch somebody else's match. Or maybe it's a confrontation where after the match, your heel attacks the babyface. Anything that builds that tension is happening in the second act. Now, the midpoint, where they call the big twist, usually you don't get a lot of that in wrestling. Their midpoint is when the match is announced. All right, we can't keep you two apart. We've had a problem. You two want to kill each other. You're going to do it Thursday at the Omni in front of a live crowd, or you're going to do it this weekend at the pay-per-view. However, it's going to move from there. And then as things rise, there will, of course, be obstacles for the babyface to overcome till you get to the disaster. And the disaster usually happens during the match, but sometimes it's before. A good example is when a heel will attack a babyface and injure a body part before the match. Or the babyface will have to go through the heel's minions, and the minions don't want to beat him, they just want to take him out. Raising that tension again, making it so that you as a viewer see that the hero has more to overcome. Then we get the actual match. The match itself is a story, but how the match ends determines what comes next. They call the match where everything ends a blow off. You may not have the blow off in the initial match. It may be the bad guy, the heel, cheats to win. They can't do anything about it when it happens, but a commissioner or power figure or an authority figure can say, because of this, we're going to have another match, and we're going to make it so that what the heel did cannot affect it. Maybe it's a steel cage. Maybe it's a no holds barred. Maybe it's a no rules. Maybe it's a lights out, any sort of thing to keep building that tension. But the other thing about storytelling, and a lot of wrestlers call this psychology. As someone with a psychology major, that always kind of rubs me the wrong way. Yes, it's the psychology of getting people involved in the match, but it's storytelling. In the match, the best example I can give you is one from recently, and that was probably the best match that's ever been on Dynamite. That is Konosuke Takeshita versus Will Ospreay. The story of the match is that it's Will Ospreay's speed versus Takeshita's power. In the beginning of the match, power is going to dominate. Takeshita dominated in the match. He would cut off Ospreay whenever Ospreay tried to do his big moves or get some speed going. Takeshita would cut him off. Ospreay had to wear him out. The old rope-a-dope strategy, which is used constantly in wrestling, and Muhammad Ali used it in boxing as well. But Ospreay kept trying to hit his big moves. Takeshita would have to cut him off, but it would tire Takeshita. Takeshita was an expert at showing that he was getting more and more tired as the match went on. His big moves took more time. His big moves didn't hurt as much. He would have to, when they would both collide or something, they would both be on the mat. Ospreay would always be the one up first. Takeshita would be pulling himself up. They then move to bigger moves. Ospreay doing the big flips and dives and his speed moves and kicks. Takeshita still trying to do the power moves, but it's a longer period between each one. Ospreay is wearing him down. He's wearing him out by using his superior speed and cardio. When we get to the end, Ospreay finally catches Takeshita unprepared for the hidden blade. Now, he tried the hidden blade a number of times. Takeshita always cut him off. Finally, Takeshita is too exhausted to cut him off. The hidden blade hits. Will Ospreay wins. That is how storytelling is done inside a match. A match that I will call a spot fest is when there's no story. It's this guy hits a move and this guy hits a move and they hit their moves and they hit their moves and they hit their moves until finally somebody wins. And those are fun as well, but they don't count as storytelling because it's basically more an exhibition. A good wrestling match tells a story. The story can be anything from I'm going to go after his leg because he always wins with the figure four. So one person is always attacking the leg, or this person's finishing move is an arm. I'm going to keep going after the arm. Or this person had an injury. They had a neck injury. So I'm going to keep going after the neck. Those are the type of stories they tell. When you watch a Bret Hart match, he is always telling a story because that's what he was taught. Now, when you get to covering a wrestling event, having to tell a story is more partially you're going to interpret that story and explain it to the reader. When you're doing coverage of a show, you're basically writing it for the people who didn't see it or for the people who want more information on it. I used to read a lot of coverage when I started watching wrestling because it's why are they doing this? What is the meaning of this? And the people who wrote the coverage were good at explaining this person does this all the time. The other person knows he does it all the time, so he's trying to cut them off. Another thing is that this is done by the commentary team. They will tell you what the feud is going into the match. What are the stakes in the match? Why is this person doing this? What is going on? Not just move, 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 but they're doing this to set up for this later. They're doing this because they sense a weakness here. Samoa Joe is doing this because he's a power-based wrestler, but he can be worn down. He has weak legs, that sort of thing. So the Dynamite on February 28th was a good example of telling the overall story of the show as well as the story of each match. The overall story of the show started with Adam Copeland, Cope, because he can't use Edge anymore, so Cope is short enough to fit on shirts and hats and things. He's sitting in an ambulance. He's got a match coming up with Jon Moxley. He knows that Jon Moxley's group, the Death Riders, are always trying to interfere. So going into their match at the pay-per-view, he's going to take them out one by one. He has an ambulance because this is the show before the pay-per-view. Anyone who's left is leaving in an ambulance. Through the show, we see Copeland hunting the Death Riders, trying to find them. Oh, excuse me. We get sequences of him hunting for them. We get sequences of them evading him. We get sequences of them trying to interfere in a match, but Adam Copeland shows up, so they leave until the end of the show where he finally catches up with them. And anybody who hasn't already been sent to the hospital by Cope is beaten up and sent to the hospital so that at the pay-per-view, Jon Moxley will be alone. So that is how you fill in. You explain, this is how the story starts. this is what they're doing along the way, and this is how the story ends. The entire show had a story arc. Not every show will have a story arc. The show this week did not have a story arc because we're starting, we're just after a pay-per-view. We've set the groundwork, and now all of the stories for the pay-per-view are in the early parts of the second act. This is where MJF is trying to get into the Hurt Syndicate for some reason. We've got Adam Page and Swerve Strickland are starting to come to a level point where they're not trying to kill each other anymore. Jon Moxley is still being hunted, but we don't know who his opponent's going to be yet. All of these stories are in the beginning of their second act. So you're not going to have a through line for each show. You'll have a main event. They may or may not talk about it as they go through. Usually AEW will just mention the main event. If it's a big main event, they will pepper things in through. One of my criticisms is that they don't do more of that. I honestly believe because you're watching a show, and we as people want the 3-act structure. We want that beginning, middle with rising tension and an end. And if it's not done right, we don't know why, but we just didn't like that. I think they should, open the show with an opening thing, and then here's what we've got coming up, and our main event is this, and this is why it is a main event. Then you get promos from each person leading in, maybe a vignette about why they hate each other, so that main event means more, so that you've gone through that 3-act structure, and that main event match is your climax. Now, when you take a match itself, you're also having to write it like a 3-act story. The example I'm going to use is Sabu's last match. I covered Sabu's last match last Friday. The story was that Sabu did not show up for the Indie Hall of Fame last year. He blew it off, took the money, and just didn't show, which is a very Sabu thing. And since his last match was going to be with GCW, which did the Indie Hall of Fame, they decided they were going to play off that. And Joey Janela is, I loved you. I grew up watching you. I based my career on you, but you're a terrible person. And I'm the one who needs to take you out. I'm the one who needs to stop you. They built this up through promos on other GCW shows. When we get to the show, the announcers tell us this is Sabu's last match. He is retiring after this match. This is why Joey Janela hates him. We don't hear anything from Sabu because Sabu's mystique is he doesn't talk. He did talk a couple of times before this, which kind of disappointed me. I like the persona of he doesn't speak English. Then the match is a no rope barbed wire match. We're going to have craziness in the ring, lots of violence. Of course, it starts with them trying to whip each other into the barbed wire, and they're able to put on the brakes and stop so that they're not immediately put in the barbed wire. As a person doing the recap, my job is explain. Why are these two fighting? What's the inciting incident? As the match goes, I'm not going to write every move. I'm not going to put, a listing, a checklist. I'm going to write about the moves that tell the story. Whipping Sabu into the barbed wire, but he's able to stop short. Then they fight in the middle of the ring. I'm not going to say he did this many and they did that many. No, I'm going to say they throw hands in the middle of the ring. Joey Janela is trying to wear Sabu out so Sabu can be tossed into the barbed wire. Sabu is trying to hold his own, trying to defend himself. I talk about there was a box with barbed wire netting on it. One of the things, if you follow my audios, I often talk about Chekhov's gun. That is a storytelling technique from Anton Chekhov. If you show a gun in the first act, it has to go off in the last act. When you watch a wrestling match, if somebody sets up a table early on in the match, it's going to be used by the end of the match. In this, if you've got a box with barbed wire netting, somebody's going through it at the end of the match. And as I write, I talk about this person came in. This, and for the people who maybe don't know, this person was his former manager. The Sandman used to be in ECW with him. And of course, he takes 10 minutes to get to the ring, which does Sabu no good. Sabu's being beat up. Oh my gosh, it's the Sandman. He's here to save Sabu. No, he's got to take 10 minutes to go through the crowd, drink beer, pour beer on them, play Enter Sandman 4 or 5 times. That's just how he is. You've also got the people on Joey Janela's side who get involved in the match. You're telling the story of the match, not just the moves. You're explaining the emotional points, each of the crisis points in the match, so that when you read it, you get a full picture of what happened and not just there were 3 Hurricane Ranas and 14 Tope Con Heroes, and this he cut his arm, his head, and his shoulder. You want there to be a story because we human beings are hardwired for story. On the opposite end, this week we had a Young Bucks match. It was their first match back since October, November. And it was just a spot fest because the Young Bucks are very much a highlight reel. They're a human highlight reel. They know lots of big, flashy, high flying moves, and the fans want to see the big, flashy, high voltage stuff. So when I write up one of their matches, I will say this was a spot fest, and I will talk about the big spots. Is there a story? Usually not, unless someone else is involved. The Young Bucks usually don't have a story because they have a different style. There are some people who really enjoy that style. There are some people who really hate that style. I believe there is a place for it, but as time goes on, and they're not able to do all of the high flying stuff because as you get older, your ability to do that stuff and recover quickly goes away. Matt Hardy always talked about you've got a bump card. You don't know how many bumps you're going to be able to take, but you'll be able to tell when you've almost filled up everything on the bump card. So they will either learn how to do more storytelling or they will move on. There are a lot of wrestlers. Rey Mysterio Jr., when he started in WCW, was a spot machine. That's all he did. He did spot, 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 spot. Came into WWE, spot, 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 spot. As he's gotten older, he has learned how to tell a story so that it's not just, oh, he's going to do the Tiger Fate kick that he calls the 619. No, he's going to build up to it. He's going to make it more important because he can't do it 3 or 4 times in a match. He does it once and it either works or it doesn't. Now, I have not been looking at people's notes here. So, all right, one thing, the whole MJF Hurt Syndicate storyline makes no sense. I don't want to spend all my time taking questions, but here it is. The story actually, I think, is a lot like a lot of what MJF stories are, which is he plans a long-term story where he doesn't have to wrestle every week. The story starts with he and MVP knew each other back when MJF was just starting in the business, and he looks up to MVP as a mentor. And he wants to be in the Hurt Syndicate because with them, he could sort of skip the line to get a world title match. The problem is, Bobby Lashley knows who he is, doesn't like him. Shelton Benjamin knows who he is, but can be persuaded. So every week, we're going to get MJF sort of trying to manipulate to get into this group so that he can then use them to get that world title shot. MVP has let us know he knows who MJF is. He knows what a weasel he is, which subverts a lot of wrestling tropes because usually everybody's ignorant to how sneaky and weaselly your sneaky weasel heels are. He is subverting it by saying, yeah, I know he can't be trusted. I know he's just going to use this. I know we can't trust him. So we're going to use him until we don't need him anymore. Bobby Lashley has not been convinced of this, but he's going to take advantage of MJF as long as he can. Now, where are they going to go with it? I don't know. But I do know that they are in the this week with Bobby Lashley basically stole MJF's car. We're in the middle of that second act. We're not at the inciting incident. We're past that. We're at the twist where Bobby Lashley has figured out how to use MJF, how to manipulate him to get what he wants. So there's your story. Now, you could not like the story. And there are times when people will watch a AEW show and they'll say there is no story, when in actuality, it's they don't like the story. Or the story is either taking too long or it's too short. Now I'm going to go back to my notes. I'll get to your questions, I promise. But I want to talk about how wrestling storylines can be subverted. The first way to subvert a wrestling story is you build to a match and you have your climax. That's the, and then the third act is what happened afterward. One of the things you can do, though, is you can prolong that. Okay, they had a match. It's a double DQ or a time limit draw, or the heel cheated, or there was a run in, or something like that. They have to wrestle again. And maybe there's a stipulation. And then there's a run in. All right, we're going to stop the run ins by they will be in a steel cage. Or we will stop the run ins by if there's any outside interference, you either lose or you're suspended or there's a huge fine, something like that. You can prolong those stories using that. So wrestling, unlike a lot of other storytelling styles, can get to that third act and sort of bounce on the ceiling with it. So you hit your second act climax, but then you drop back down into building to another climax and drop back down into building to another climax. And that is a subversion. Another subversion is the way they kept the title on Ric Flair in the 80s. Ric Flair was your world champion, but anytime it looked like he was going to lose, the Four Horsemen would interfere. So you get to that climax, and your climax is cut off, and you're dropped back down into the second act. And your babyface has to build back up again and again and again until you get to things like when Lex Luger versus Ric Flair at, I forget, I think it was Great American Bash 1990, where the Horsemen couldn't interfere and they were going to have Sting outside the ring to stop them. And it was in a steel cage, and they had all these stipulations to sort of end that feud. But those are ways to subvert the three-act structure. When Hogan was hot in the 80s, they did that as well. The first time they would build up to Hogan in Madison Square Garden, and he would have his challenger. And he and the challenger would have words, or the challenger would come to the ring and beat him down. And then the next month, they may have a match, and it's the result is thrown out. The bad guy cheats and the ref sees it, or some other way so that they could keep that going month after month after month until they finally wanted to end it. There are other formulas as well. WWE used to have a rock solid formula, especially under Hogan, but they still used it with John Cena. Your bad guy would do squashes on the way up. He would destroy people you don't know. Then he would go after the mid-card people, and then he would start going after the upper mid-tier folk. And he was built as a threat. He was decimating people. He was doing heinous, horrible things. And then he would attack the babyface and lay him out so that the babyface would have to rally, or he would just barely win and be injured during the win. Then they would keep the feud going with tag team matches and all sorts of other things to sort of keep the two around each other, but not actually fighting until you would get to that blow off match at a pay per view, usually a WrestleMania or SummerSlam, one of the big four. And those are ways you can subvert that 3-act structure. So when you're watching wrestling and you go, wait a minute, the story didn't end when they had their big climactic battle. That's because they're building onto it. They're going to drop down back into building to another match. That could be anything from these two people work together, we don't want to build up somebody else, or we're building to a Hell in a Cell, or we're building to a a bull rope match, or we're building to something big, kind of like what happened over and over again with John Cena, where it was almost a 3-act structure where the first match he would win, but the heel would do something. The next match, the heel would do something and it would be thrown out. And then the third match, John Cena would overcome all victories. Or in the case of the Nexus, he did it the first time he faced him, where he was able to destroy all of them. Another way to think about the 3-act structure, I have lots of examples here, but my favorite example is the Bret Hart Steve Austin double turn. So going into the match, Bret Hart is your white meat babyface. He is beloved by people because he stands for truth, honor, all that is good in wrestling. He won't cheat. He won't do anything bad. He's your stalwart hero. And Steve Austin is a beer drinking bully. This is a year out from Austin 316. Austin is getting cheered by the crowd. Bret Hart is starting to get booed by the crowd. But they still go into it with Bret Hart as your white meat babyface, Steve Austin as your traditional heel. And when they have that match, everybody talks about it as a double turn, but they don't explain why. The reason is that Bret Hart got more and more frustrated that Austin would not quit. And Bret would use nastier and nastier tactics. He would go after a body part and try to hurt him, not out wrestle him, hurt him. And Austin would refuse to give up. You've got that famous image of Austin, blood streaming down his face when Vince McMahon did not allow blood, in a sharpshooter, refusing to give up. He passes out rather than giving up. Now, did Steve Austin change who he was? No. He was just the toughest SOB in the company. And Bret Hart had lost his cool. And with Austin, people cheering Austin, he turned on the audience. That is how you get that double turn. Austin himself did not change. If you look at what he did beforehand and what he did after, he was still the, I'm going to come to the ring, I'm going to drink beer, I'm going to kick your ass. Bret Hart was, you fans have lost your minds. You like this terrible, terrible human being, and I don't trust you anymore. That is how they did the double turn, and that is how you use that 3-act structure to tell your story. And I can't believe I only have 5 minutes left. So for the conclusion.
No, you're good. You can go down to 15. You got till
Okay.
15 after the next hour. Yeah, you got 20 minutes, bro.
Oh, okay. I thought I was done at 3. Good. Go a little further. I also wanted to talk about a time when the 3-act structure was done poorly. How many people remember when Cody Rhodes was in AEW and he started losing matches? Now, Cody Rhodes, they talk about how AEW used Cody Rhodes poorly. Cody Rhodes was completely in charge of what he did. And a lot of the things he did were heel maneuvers. I'm not talking about how he cheated or he broke the rules or anything, but he would mock his opponents. He had no problem making fun of them. He would, early on in matches, when someone was down, he would just stop and do push-ups, showing that he is so much better than them. Those are all traditional heel maneuvers. But he was our baby face. But after Aleister Black came in, he lost to Aleister Black, and I think The audience turned on Cody at that point because Malachi Black, as he was known in AEW, came in. He was beloved. He was a guy who was in WWE. People didn't feel that WWE used him right. So when he came in, he beat Cody Rhodes for the TNT title. And Cody went on a spiral downward. He was losing matches. He wasn't listening to his coach, Arn Anderson. He was lashing out at people around him. As he went into this downward spiral, that is your 3-act structure. Your inciting incident, Malachi Black beats him. The story is, how is Cody going to come back? You have incident after incident where he would lose because he didn't listen, or because he got cocky, or because he didn't pay attention to what was going on in the ring and was more watching what was going on in the crowd and how the crowd was reacting. They built up to has each of his friends stepped aside. They couldn't deal with him anymore. So in a normal 3-act structure, you're going to get to that point where your hero has to make a decision. Cody's decision was, I have to go back to my roots. All of that perfectly fine. The problem is, when he went back to his roots, he goes back to the barn with the wrestling ring, and he gets in and he starts to spar. And when people say, you've gotten too cocky, you take too much for granted, this and that, he yells at them. They tell him he's wrong. He says, I have to think about it. And then the next week, the story is over and he's back to who he used to be. We didn't get that. If you look at the 3-act structure, we did not get that. Disaster is when all of his friends turn on him and they tell him in the barn, you've got to change. Crisis. We didn't get the crisis. He just said, oh, I'll do better. The Cody character did not change. He did not learn anything. He did not change who he was. It's just, that's done. So you didn't get a climax to the story. Now, you as a viewer were probably watching along and then it's, oh, okay, well, I guess that's done. Because you don't think in your head, there needs to be a climax. There needs to be that moment where all hope is lost and your hero changes something about himself. We just got, oh, I'll try to be better. Therefore, because the audience didn't get that catharsis, because they didn't get that climax of the story then didn't matter. It fell apart. And after that, very soon after that, he went to WWE. He had a story there. They want my dad's title. And they went through that story. I think he learned that you need to have the disaster, the crisis, and the climax. Without those 3 things, your story just ends. One of the things that I always use when I talk about when they mess this up is, that's not a grand finale, that's a grand finale. So there have been a number of examples of this happening. Boy, I have a whole list here. The biggest one is the Daniel Bryan, Roman Reigns WrestleMania story. And the reason that sticks out in my head is because it was covered outside of wrestling. For those of you who don't remember, Daniel Bryan had become beloved in WWE. And they did him poorly at a WrestleMania where he was distracted and he got beat in 3 seconds, lost the title, and spent the rest of the year kind of floating around in the mid-card. He got injured. And when he came back from the injury, he said, now that I'm back, I need to get my title back. I need to prove that what happened last year was not who I am. I need to win the title. And in order to do that, I need to win at WrestleMania. Now, yes, before Royal Rumble, everybody gives a promo that they're going to win the Royal Rumble and go to WrestleMania. But because this was Bryan Daniels' first match, back from an injury, after a match that was roundly hated by fans because Daniel Bryan just basically turned, got kicked in the face, and lost the title. We go into the match. Daniel Bryan comes in, gets the biggest pop of the night, And his elimination isn't even a big special elimination. He's just tossed out. This is the one where Roman Reigns won. The Rock came down to congratulate him, and the crowd turned on Roman Reigns. And if you go back and you watch that Rumble, you can see The Rock going, we need to get out of here. And they beat feet to the back because the crowd has turned on them. This WWE then course corrected and did the story where, okay, Daniel Bryan, if he wins the match at the beginning of WrestleMania, can be added to the main event. But this is one where everybody was prepared for that 3-act structure. Daniel Bryan, the inciting incident is that he's back. He's going to get revenge. He's going to go to the Royal Rumble. We wanted that story to continue. And instead, the story got to the midpoint, which is the big twist, and they ended it. They cut that story off. And the audience turned because they wanted the 3-act structure. They wanted him to struggle and fight and get that win and then go to WrestleMania and get revenge for losing his title. But when you cut it off, that's when your crowd turns on you. And you'll see next time you see and the crowd turns on a story or they turn on something, you'll see that's when the crowd loses interest in the story because it didn't follow that 3-act structure. I could point really quickly to Cody versus John Cena. Again, your 3-act structure. John Cena wins the Elimination Chamber. He's in the ring with Cody. Then The Rock shows up. The Rock motions for, the story had been that The Rock wanted Cody Rhodes to sell his soul and become his champion, and he refused. So John Cena turns heel, attacks Cody. What we expect is, oh, okay, because The Rock couldn't get Cody, he got John Cena instead. The problem is The Rock went away. So we're going through the 3-act structure. We're at the point where the midpoint, the twist. Why did John Cena turn? Why was The Rock there? What is the meaning of this? And John Cena gives a promo about how he never liked the fans. Did he bring up The Rock? Did he bring up that The Rock wanted Cody's soul? Did he bring any of that up? No. So your story got derailed and ticket sales for WrestleMania plateaued at that point. Because you're subverting the 3-act structure without another 3-act structure idea being involved. So when I'm writing, and I have to keep the 3-act structure in my mind, I have to keep all of these things in mind. The first thing to do is when it's done right, you explain the match. You tell the story that they're telling. So that if I didn't see the match, I understand what happened, how the story ended, and where it's going to go from there. As a reporter, I'm also putting in, oh, they did this little bit. This is probably going to pay off later. One of the things that AEW is doing that they're kind of planting seeds, but not telling us much about it, we keep seeing people cosplaying as Don Callis. There are people who cosplay at tons of wrestling events. Why are they pointing out that someone's cosplaying it as Don Callis? Why are they pointing it out in different cities? Why is Don Callis reacting to it? There's obviously something they're going to do there, and they're taking their time to do it. My job is to point that out to say, hey, you should pay attention to that. Or here are the takeaways from this match or this interaction. And then there are 2 types of coverage I do. The first is what I call the play-by-play, where I'm doing a recap of the show. When I do a recap of the show, I explain what goes on. I talk about all those things. Then there's the blogging of the show. And when I'm blogging, I'm giving even less detail about what happens in the match. I'm talking about what kind of match it is, but I'm also saying if the match worked or not. Because I took journalism classes, because I think like a journalist, I keep those two things separate. If I am doing a play-by-play, I may point out if a match is really, really good, or I may point out if someone is a standout in a match. But in a blog, I'm going to say, this was a good TV match, or this was a mediocre match that was here to calm the crowd down before we get to a bigger show. I think a lot of the problem in what we call wrestling journalism is that people are doing reviews rather than reporting. They're saying what they thought, how they reacted, if they liked something, rather than what happened. And the old journalism rule: who, what, when, where, why, and how. You have to put all of those things. And because wrestling is entertainment and I'm not going to say scripted, but it is laid out, you have to tell what the story is as well as all of those parts. That is what the 3-act structure is for the coverage of wrestling. Now, I've got a little time left, so I'm actually going to look at some of the questions. So let's see here. How do I feel about the retreat from traditional pro wrestling ethical binary to I think the big thing it's opened up wrestling so that it doesn't have to be always good versus evil. It can still be about revenge. It can still be about titles. Swerve Strickland is not a good guy. Swerve Strickland has done horrible, heinous things. His main nemesis, Adam Page, has also done horrible, heinous things. Neither one's a heel, neither one's a babyface, but both are tough guys who hate each other. And when they met in the ring, you would choose who you wanted to see win. You would choose rather than, well, poor Adam Page has been beat down by Swerve Strickland. I want to see Adam Page get revenge. It adds another dimension. It's one of those things about more complex stories. I am a huge crime fiction aficionado. I've written some crime fiction novels. Your protagonist in a crime fiction story is not a good guy, but you still are going to watch, and in a way, you want to see him succeed. And I think wrestling, when they get away from straight baby face and straight heel, they're able to play more shades of gray. MJF, bless his heart, he's getting cheered again because he's showing vulnerability. He's showing this. The Hurt Syndicate, they're classic heels and they're beating the hell out of everybody, and they're the hottest thing in AEW. So I think getting away from the classic black and white and having more gray, there are older fans who just don't understand it. But I honestly think it's modern fans like tough guys, modern fans like guys who go out of their way to entertain them, rather than a heel or a baby face. How many times do I need to watch a match to analyze it like this? I do not get time to analyze. When you're doing coverage, as I talked about with the Royal Rumble, I fell behind. You're doing coverage in real time, watching it as you go on. If I was able to go back, I would probably be able to correct some things. But as is, because you're covering it in real time, and fans want that report the minute the show is over. I have gotten emails 5 minutes after a show is over. Where's the audio? Well, the audio is going to take a half hour to 45 minutes to record. But because it's the internet, everybody wants it immediately. So you have to keep thinking this on the fly. You could get things wrong. They could highlight something accidentally. You could see an injury and think it's storyline when it's an actual injury. The best example of that is when Pac got injured a few weeks ago, because the first match of the show was supposed to be a longer match, but Claudio Castagnoli was able to cut it off. It seemed like it was going to be a long match, but nope, it was over in a couple of minutes. The next match was a match with Pac. It was over in a couple of minutes. And I thought, as I'm writing it, oh, this is to continue that theme, when in actuality, Pac had hurt his foot. So You're dealing with real time. You don't have time to go back. I don't think we're ever going to get time to go back and sort of watch something two or three times for that sort of coverage. Now, I have written editorials and I've gone back and watched things a couple of times, but that is when I'm stating an opinion about what's being done. Or when the big thing is when something goes too far, when they get, when the violence goes too far and you're getting to a point where somebody gets injured, I will go back and watch to make sure that it's not, I call it a magic trick, because there are ways to make things look like they hurt you, but really you're using stagecraft so it doesn't. Let's see here. Cody may be a nice guy, but he seemed like a loser in AEW. Why is it okay in WWE? Because in WWE, he doesn't lose as much. I think sort of um, Cody sort of broke his career by losing a AEW title match when he said, I will never go for the AEW title again if I lose this match. That means in that 3-act structure, there's not going to be any tension because he's not going to go for the world title. He may have feuds, but there's a ceiling. And no matter what story they tell, it's going to hit that ceiling. He's never going for the world title. He's never going to carry that strap, and he's never going to go above a certain level. So I think in a lot of ways, as a fan, you go, well, I like him, but he's never going to be champion. Let's see. Were there any other questions? I see I have, like, now that I get to go till 4:15. Any last questions?
Yeah, I see one in here from AC. How do you feel the retreat from traditional pro wrestling, ethical binary, the evil heel versus good guy babyface? How has that affected the structuring of match stories and angles, maybe in general?
I think it opens it up for more creativity because you could have your protagonist as a bad guy. You could have your antagonist as sort of a good guy. It gives more range so that when you get to that climax, you can have bigger twists. You can have bigger reveals. It also means that the storytelling can be more nuanced. It doesn't have to be, well, evil heel does evil thing to start this. There have been a number of feuds where I just want to know which one of us is the best. And I honestly think that comes from Rocky 3,
Oh,
where at the end, Apollo Creed and Rocky start to face off because they got to know which one is best. And we never get that because at the end of it is them throwing a punch at each other. But in wrestling, you can have that. I don't hate you, but I need to show that I'm better than you. I need to show I've outgrown you. There were matches with Dustin Rhodes where people who he had trained in AEW will say, I need to show you how good I am now. So it gives more nuance. It sort of opens up a wider range of storytelling.
and speaking of storytelling and with comics, David, what is the wrestling equivalent of the comic I like the most? I like least or less than the comic you like the least.
Okay, that is my closing at the end of my podcast. The comic we like the least, we still like better than the comic that you like the most. What it is, if I like something, I'm going to like it with my full heart.
Thank you.
I can't tell you how many wrestling fans there are who all they do is complain. Oh, WrestleMania's build this year wasn't any good, and AEW sucks, and
That's
I
what they're
can't
saying.
get into this, and everything is bad. Well, I'm watching wrestling. I'm watching two guys who are going to do what they can to entertain me. Maybe the build wasn't good, but the match can still be good. Maybe the build is good and the match doesn't quite work. I've watched a number of matches where you've had two workers who are really, really good, but they don't have chemistry. They're just off that day. And I'm just happy that I'm watching wrestling. If I don't like something, I will tell you I don't like it, but I will not say, and that's why wrestling sucks. or with comics. I used to work in comic shops. I cannot tell you how many people would come in complaining about the comics that they buy. Oh, I'm still buying this comic and the art on it's terrible and I don't like where the story's going. Well, then why are you buying it?
That's what people are, that's their passion. Complaining is not the thing.
Right.
You're a fan of
And
complaining.
I can't get into that mindset. I really can't.
Me neither. It's weird. I don't get it.
I would say that the only stuff I don't like in wrestling are Yoshihiro matches. And I've had to cover those. And that's, if you don't know a Yoshihiro match, Yoshihiro is a sex doll that is controlled by someone, and everyone in the match treats it like this is a wrestler who's flipping them and doing that. It's one of those things where, okay, that's a good one-time joke, but this has been going on for years and they've won titles. Do I like that match? No. Do I understand it? Yes. Am I ever going to like it? No. But I'm still going to like it better than the person who I bought WrestleMania and the match was a one-star match and it was just terrible. I can enjoy how people will, sell for this sex doll that is being thrown at them. I
You're
can
pushing into
appreciate that.
Franny's territory because that's what her presentation is on at 15 minutes. And she dropped it. You got it mixed up. That Yoshihiro's the brother, Yoshihiko.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't. I
You're like, I never care.
Anytime that match is on and I have to cover it, it's like, okay, here's another one of these matches. Everybody pretends to sell for it. Thank goodness it got thrown out of the ring.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
isn't all selling pretending to selling?
But there's a
I will
realism
ask.
to it. Yeah, that's a good question. But you're suspending your disbelief. If I am watching, I'll use a real wrestling example. When Paul White was leaving WCW and going to WWE, they wanted to punish him, so they had him lose to everybody. He lost a match to Rey Mysterio Jr. Was it realistic in any way, shape, or form? No. But by goodness, Paul White sold and sold and sold. And in my mind, it was, why am I watching this? You need to be able to suspend your disbelief. You need to be able to, oh, yeah, if somebody hit him, he would react like that. Now, if you want some bad examples of selling, there's a very famous one in TNA where a referee was supposed to take a bump after he got hit. And the hit came nowhere near him to the point where the wrestler who was supposed to hit him leapt and was like 3 feet away. And the referee stood there for a second, knew he had to take the bump, so he just fell down. That I can't suspend my disbelief for. But if somebody just barely glazes you, I can suspend my disbelief for that. It's a matter of degree.
mm-hmm.
Do I think that a figure four will cause someone to pass out? No. Am I going to accept it in the wrestling ring because these guys are doing such a good job at selling it? Of course I am, because they're going to make it look like the pain is unbelievable.
Yeah.
But we've also had that 3-act structure leading up to it where that person has been going after this person's leg the whole match, so that when he does strap on the figure four, that leg's already injured. So you're working the injury.
It reminds me, the parallel I'll say quickly, is like, I'm a big horror movie fan. And so I watch horror movies like all day. I'll have Shudder on while I'm lecturing at Howard and I'm looking up and I was like, oh, she got sewn into a cow. That's cool. Like, I just love, which I just saw Ravage and that's what happened. Spoiler alert. It's fucking phenomenal. But yeah, that suspension of belief in like watching horror movies and you know they're going to trip when the monster's chasing them, but you still be like, oh, you dumb bitch, you trap. I knew you were going to do it. You know, there's like some stuff you just wait for because you know in structure that it's coming. You're almost waiting for that anticipation in addition to, you know.
Another thing about like horror movies and other movies, you've got to suspend your disbelief even more because let's face it,
Monsters.
any of these movies would end if someone had a cell phone.
Or there,
Yeah, there's somebody here. Can you send a SWAT team?
yeah, there's always no service suddenly.
As a writer, I don't want to write anything past 1995 because cell phones end all suspense. Let's
Oh,
see, is suspension of disbelief a real thing, or are you emotionally investing in the fiction? Suspension of disbelief is a real thing because when you go to a movie or you watch a TV show, Harrison Ford is not flying a spaceship. But you forget that he's acting, you forget it's a set, you forget it's special effects,
mhm.
you buy in. And with wrestling, the minute you walk in that door, you're entering a different world. You're suspending your disbelief because the things they do are illegal. Adam Page burned down Swerve Strickland's house. And what was the punishment? He won a wrestling match. Not, okay, that's arson. You're going to jail for a few years. No,
But
you
Trump
suspend your
thought
disbelief
it
when you
was
go in.
real.
Yeah.
But Trump thought it was real when McMahon's limo blew up. Remember?
I'm not going to go into politics. I just want to warn
Shannon did
people
that
that
for
I
us.
am to the left of Bernie Sanders.
Fair,
So
fair.
let's see.
Gotta wrap it up because we've actually got 3 more presentations and like 45
Okay.
minutes to get it through. But I know we could keep rapping about this forever. Oh, someone asked about your social. You got Twitter, or where can people yell at you?
Yes. On the Facebooks, I am Cory Strode.
Facebooks.
I don't have Twitter because it's owned by Elon Musk.
Fair.
I'm on Blue Sky, but I never use it. I'm mostly a Facebook person, but if you want to follow my podcast,
There you
it
go.
is Crazy Comics and Stories, KRAYZ.solitairerose.com, or go to all your fire-breathing podcast aggregators, put in Crazy Comics and Stories. If you want to follow my wrestling writing, it's at PWinsider.com. I strongly recommend that you buy the subscription because we do tons of audio. I do, well, I haven't been able to because of my actual work schedule, but we do a audio after Dynamite. We do audio after every pay-per-view. I am going to start doing a weekly, the week in AEW sort of, here's what's going on in AEW, because I haven't been able to do the Wednesday night shows. They do tons of other audio, tons of interviews, but all of my writing is on PW Insider. I don't do any wrestling writing anywhere else.
Nice. See, yeah.
And if you want to,
Hmm?
and if you want my terrible jokes and my thoughts on comics, it's all on the Facebook.